Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, we will explore lost teachings and hidden secrets that Buddhist masters have guarded for ages to quiet the mind and unlock deep, profound peace. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I will share a selection of profound, nearly forgotten Zen tales, each revealing an ancient key to mental freedom and emotional clarity. Every story holds a transformative teaching, one that can fundamentally shift your relationship with stress, anxious thoughts, and the constant feeling of needing something more. These may appear to be simple stories, but they are far more powerful. These teachings are potent, preserved wisdom from enlightened minds who understood a truth most of us have forgotten. Tranquility isn't found by rearranging the world around us, but by recalibrating the world within us. The great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Peace is present right here and now, in ourselves and in everything we do and see." The question is whether or not we are in touch with it. As we journey through these remarkable tales, you will feel a powerful shift begin to unfold. The grip of worry will gently loosen its hold. The endless chatter of the mind will begin to soften into silence. You may feel yourself naturally settling into a state of profound peace and serene rest. So, settle in deeply now. Let your body sink into whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you are about to receive the wisdom that has been patiently waiting for you all along. Let us begin our journey with a story about beauty and imperfection. Outside a small, secluded monastery grew a gnarled and ancient pine tree. Its trunk was twisted into a dozen knots, its branches grew in awkward, crooked directions, and it offered very little shade. For generations, the younger monks had complained about it. "It is useless," said one. "We cannot get a single straight plank of wood from it. It is an eyesore." "It is a waste of good soil," said another. "We should cut it down and plant a row of straight, elegant cedars that will be useful to the monastery in the future." The old abbot, who often sat near the tree, would simply listen and smile. One day, a young, ambitious monk took it upon himself to make a formal case for removing the tree. He listed all its faults, its ugliness, its lack of utility, its crookedness. "It serves no purpose, master," the monk concluded. "It is a flaw in an otherwise perfect garden." The abbot beckoned the young monk to sit beside him. He pointed to a spot beneath one of the tree's most twisted branches. "You see that hollow there, where the trunk bends? That is where the field mouse hides from the hawk. You see this low, crooked branch? It is the only one the old cat can climb to sun himself in the afternoon. You see the thick, gnarled bark? It is home to 100 different kinds of moss and insects, a world unto itself." The abbot paused, placing a hand on the rough bark. "You see its uselessness, and so it has been left alone. The woodsman has never taken his axe to it. The storm has never broken its low, humble branches. Because it does not fit the world's idea of a perfect tree, it has been allowed to live its own long and peaceful life. It has become a sanctuary for all the things that, like it, are not grand or straight or useful. Its purpose is to simply be, and in its being, it gives shelter. Do not be so quick to judge the crooked things in the world or in yourself. Sometimes, the greatest peace is found in the places that have not been straightened. Buddha's wisdom reminds us Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. The truth revealed by the twisted pine is one our modern world desperately needs to remember. What emerges from this story is a radical reframing of value itself. The recognition that usefulness is not the only measure of worth. Why do we so readily dismiss what appears flawed or imperfect? Our contemporary culture has become obsessed with optimization, efficiency, and measurable utility. We live in a world of performance metrics, productivity hacks, and constant improvement. This mindset, while valuable in certain contexts, becomes toxic when applied to every aspect of existence. It creates a harsh internal critic that sees deviation from standard as failure, uniqueness as defect, and authenticity as inadequacy. Consider how this manifests in your daily experience. How often do you judge yourself for not being more organized, more successful, more articulate, or more disciplined? How frequently do you look at your quirks, your sensitivities, your unconventional responses to life and see them as problems to be fixed rather than gifts to be honored? The twisted pine represents all the aspects of ourselves we've learned to see as useless. Our sensitivity in a harsh world, our slowness in a fast-paced culture, our need for solitude in a social society. Zen Buddhism teaches us about the concept of wabi-sabi, the beauty found in imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. This aesthetic philosophy recognizes that the crack in the ceramic bowl, the weathered texture of aged wood, the asymmetrical shape of a hand-thrown pot, all possess a beauty that manufactured perfection cannot match. These imperfections tell stories, reveal process, and invite us into deeper appreciation. In Zen practice, we cultivate beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh eyes rather than predetermined judgments about what should be. This quality of attention allows us to see beyond our conditioned concepts of useful and useless, beautiful and ugly, worthy and worthless. We begin to perceive the intricate ecosystem that exists around and within every so-called flaw. The ancient Chinese sage Zhuangzi told of a carpenter who passed by a massive gnarled tree, and his apprentice wondered why the master didn't stop to admire it. The carpenter replied, "It's a worthless tree. Make a boat, it would sink. Make a coffin, it would rot. Make furniture, it would break. That's why it's still standing here, magnificent and ancient." Like the monastery's pine, the tree's apparent uselessness became its protection and its gift. This wisdom extends beyond self-acceptance to how we perceive others. How often do we write off the quiet person as antisocial, the unconventional thinker as problematic, or the sensitive soul as weak? In our rush to categorize and optimize, we miss the hidden gifts, the unexpected contributions, the shelter that these seemingly imperfect beings provide for others. The Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox holds the key to healthy growth. We can work on ourselves without rejecting ourselves. We can strive for betterment while honoring what already is. We can tend our rough edges without trying to eliminate our essential nature. Tonight, as you notice the aspects of yourself you typically criticize, your procrastination, your overthinking, your emotional intensity, can you look for the hidden ecosystem they support? Perhaps your procrastination allows for deeper reflection. Maybe your overthinking protects you from hasty decisions. Your emotional intensity might provide sanctuary for others who feel deeply in a superficial world. As the Buddha taught, if you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with an angry thought. The twisted pine teaches us that self-love includes embracing our crooked branches, our gnarled bark, our unconventional beauty. In accepting our imperfections, we discover they were never flaws at all, but unique forms of grace that make shelter possible for ourselves and others. Our next story reveals the profound practice of patient attention through the tale of a young woman in a village famed for its magnificent silk tapestries. There lived a young woman known only as the weaver's daughter. Her family were master weavers, creating intricate scenes of dragons, mountains, and emperors. But the daughter never sat at a loom. Instead, she spent her days in a quiet corner of the workshop with a colossal, tangled mound of discarded silk threads. It was a chaotic mass of knots and snarls, a rainbow of colors hopelessly intertwined. Day after day, she would sit with the mound on her lap. She would not pull or force the threads. She would simply hold them, breathe, and find a single, loose end. With infinite patience, she would follow that one thread, gently teasing it from the tangle, her fingers moving with the slowness of a drifting cloud. Sometimes it took an entire day to free one single thread. She would then wind it carefully onto a small wooden spool. The villagers whispered. "She is foolish," they said, "wasting her life on scraps. She will never weave a masterpiece." Her family despaired, seeing her potential lost in a pointless task. One day, a traveling Zen master, his robes dusty from a long journey, stopped at the workshop to admire the tapestries. He saw the weavers at their looms, their hands flying, their faces tight with concentration. Then he saw the weaver's daughter in her corner, her expression serene as she slowly, lovingly, freed a single strand of crimson thread from the knot. He watched her for an hour. He saw the mountain of tangles and the small, neat spools of rescued thread beside her. He approached her, not the master weavers, and bowed deeply. "I have seen 1,000 tapestries of great beauty," he said, his voice quiet. "But here, I see the weaving of the mind itself. Everyone else rushes to create a picture for others to see. You are untangling the very knots of existence, finding peace not in the final image, but in the patient liberation of each and every thread. Please, teach me your art." The Buddha once said, "Patience is not about waiting. Patience is about how you behave while you're waiting." This ancient wisdom illuminates the deeper teaching within the weaver's daughter's practice. The art she had mastered was not thread work, but mind work. The cultivation of presence, patience, and gentle persistence in the face of complexity. Why do we struggle so profoundly with patience in our modern world? Our culture of instant gratification has trained us to expect immediate results, quick fixes, and rapid transformation. We want our meditation to calm us instantly, our relationships to improve overnight, our personal growth to unfold according to our timeline. Like the villagers watching the weaver's daughter, we often mistake slow, careful work for wasted effort. Zen Buddhism teaches us that the mind itself is like that tangled mound of silk threads. Our thoughts, emotions, memories, and conditioning are intricately knotted together in ways that cannot be forced apart. When we approach our inner tangles with impatience, pulling, yanking, trying to force rapid change, we often create tighter knots. more complexity, additional suffering. The weaver's daughter represents the alternative approach, mindful untangling. This practice begins with simply sitting with our complexity without immediately trying to fix it. Can you imagine spending an entire day patiently working with one strand of anger, one thread of old hurt, one filament of anxiety? Most of us would rather weave something impressive than do this humble, invisible work. Consider how this applies to healing trauma, changing habits, or working through relationship difficulties. These are not problems that yield to force or urgency. They require the weaver's daughter's touch, gentle, sustained attention that honors the delicate nature of the work. Each small untangling creates space for the next. Each freed thread adds to our collection of clarity. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "The present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all moments." The weaver's daughter understood this profoundly. She wasn't working towards some future state of having all threads untangled. She found complete satisfaction in the mindful liberation of this one thread, in this moment. This practice extends to how we relate to others who are struggling. Instead of offering quick advice or rushing to fix their problems, we can learn to sit patiently with their complexity. Sometimes the greatest gift is simply witnessing someone's careful work of untangling without judgment or timeline. The master recognized something the villagers missed. The weaver's daughter had found enlightenment not in creating beautiful external forms, but in engaging completely with the work before her. Her serenity came not from finishing, but from the quality of attention she brought to each moment of the process. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Practice is not about getting anywhere else. Practice is about being where you are and knowing it." The weaver's daughter knew exactly where she was, with one thread, in one moment, applying one breath's worth of gentle patience. This is the essence of mindfulness practice. Think about the tangled situations in your own life. Perhaps it's a complicated family dynamic, a pattern of self-criticism, or confusion about your life direction. What would it mean to approach these tangles like the weaver's daughter? To sit with them patiently, looking for just one loose end where you could begin? To trust that slow, mindful work is far more effective than force? The Buddha said, "A jug fills drop by drop." Our healing, our growth, our understanding all accumulate through countless small moments of patient attention. Tonight, as you encounter something complex in your mind or your life, can you resist the urge to solve it quickly? Can you instead find one thread, one breath, one sensation, one thought, and work with it gently, knowing that this single thread matters? As the Buddha taught, nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded, but once mastered, nothing can help you as much as your own thoughts well guarded. The art of untangling teaches us to guard our thoughts, not through force, but through the patient, loving attention that sets each thread free. Let us continue our journey with a tale that explores the transformation of what haunts us. A young monk named Kenji was tormented. He believed he was followed by a ghost, the faint, weeping shade of a man he had wronged in his youth before he had joined the monastery. The ghost was not frightening, but its sorrow was a constant, heavy weight upon his soul. It clouded his meditation and soured his food. He went to the head monk, a wise and practical man named Jiro. "Master," Kenji cried, "I am haunted. A spirit follows me and will not let me rest. Can you perform a ritual? Can you exorcise it with chants and sutras?" Master Jiro looked at him calmly. An exorcism is a battle, and fighting only strengthens a ghost. From now on, you must care for it. When you are served your dinner, you will take 2 bowls, one for you and one for the ghost. You will place its bowl before an empty cushion and say, "Here is your share, please eat." When you go to sleep, you will prepare 2 mats and say, "Here is your place to rest." Whatever you do, you will acknowledge your guest and provide for it. Kenji was bewildered, but his desperation was greater than his doubt. That evening, he took 2 bowls of rice. He placed one on the cushion opposite him. "Here is your share," he whispered to the empty air. He felt a profound sadness well up inside him. For the first time, he was not trying to run from the feeling. He was sitting with it, serving it. He did this for a month. He served the ghost tea. He made it a bed. He spoke to it of the weather. Slowly, something shifted. The feeling of being haunted changed to a feeling of carrying a deep, quiet sorrow. It was no longer an intruder. It was a companion. One evening, as he placed the bowl of rice down, he paused. He looked at the empty cushion, and for the first time, he asked the ghost a question. "What is it that you truly need?" In the silence of his own mind, a clear answer arose, in a voice that sounded remarkably like his own. "I need to be forgiven." Kenji sat very still as tears streamed down his face. He pressed his palms together and bowed deeply to the empty cushion, to the ghost, to himself. "I forgive you," he whispered. "I forgive myself." From that day on, he no longer set out 2 bowls. He was alone, but he was no longer haunted. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that what we resist persists, while what we embrace with compassion transforms. Kenji's ghost represents all the parts of ourselves we try to banish: guilt, shame, regret, and the shadow aspects of our personality that we'd rather not acknowledge. Why do we instinctively want to fight or exile our inner demons? Our culture teaches us to solve problems through opposition, competition, and elimination. We wage wars on drugs, declare battles against depression, and try to defeat our negative thoughts. This combative approach, while sometimes necessary in external matters, often backfires when applied to our inner world. The very energy we put into fighting our psychological shadows can give them more power over us. Zen Buddhism offers a radically different approach: befriending what troubles us. This doesn't mean indulging harmful behaviors or excusing our mistakes. Rather, it means acknowledging that these difficult aspects of our experience are part of our human wholeness and deserve compassionate attention rather than violent rejection. Consider how this applies to contemporary mental health struggles. Someone dealing with anxiety might spend enormous energy trying to eliminate anxious thoughts, which often intensifies the anxiety. Someone struggling with depression might fight against sadness, which can deepen despair. Someone haunted by past mistakes might exhaust themselves trying to forget or minimize their actions, which often keeps the guilt alive and active. Master Jiro's wisdom suggests a different path. Tend to your ghosts. This might mean setting aside time each day to acknowledge your anxiety rather than immediately seeking distraction. It could involve writing letters to people you've hurt, even if you never send them. It might mean creating space in your meditation practice for difficult emotions, rather than using spiritual practice to escape them. The Korean Zen master Seong Sahan taught, Only go straight. Don't know mind is cutting through thinking. The straight path isn't around our ghosts, but through them. When Kenji stopped trying to exorcise his haunting and instead offered it dinner, he moved from resistance to relationship. This shift from fighting to feeding represents one of the most profound spiritual technologies available to us. Notice how the ghost's true need wasn't to be destroyed, but to be heard, acknowledged, and ultimately forgiven. Our inner shadows often carry important messages about our values, our wounds, and our unfinished business. When we listen to them with patience, rather than trying to silence them with force, they often reveal what they actually need for healing. This practice requires tremendous courage. It's much easier to judge ourselves harshly or try to spiritually bypass our difficulties than to sit down and have dinner with our mistakes. Yet this gentle approach often accomplishes what years of self-criticism could not. The very act of caring for our ghosts with kindness begins to transform our relationship with them. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes, "The most fundamental aggression to ourselves is to remain ignorant by not having the courage to look at ourselves honestly and gently." Kenji's journey illustrates this courage in action. By treating his ghost as a guest rather than an enemy, he created space for understanding and ultimately healing. The story suggests that many of our ghosts are actually displaced parts of ourselves seeking integration. When Kenji finally asked what the ghost needed and heard his own voice respond, he recognized that the haunting was an externalized conversation with his own conscience. The forgiveness he offered to the empty cushion was the self-forgiveness he had been unable to access through fighting. Tonight, as you become aware of what haunts you, perhaps old resentments, shameful memories, or anxious thoughts, consider Master Jiro's radical prescription. Instead of battling these ghosts, what would it mean to set a place for them at your table? To acknowledge their presence with kindness, to listen for what they truly need. The Buddha taught, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. By caring for our ghosts with compassion in the present moment, we transform both our relationship to the past and our trajectory toward the future. Sometimes the most haunted become the most healing because they have learned to befriend what others still fight. Now, let us turn to a tale about the gentle power of patience. A wealthy patron commissioned the monastery to create a perfect contemplation stone for its new silent garden. It had to be, in his words, as smooth as still water, as flawless as the sky. The task fell to an old monk named Ryokan, who had once been a stone carver before taking his vows. The patron delivered a huge, rough block of grey granite, full of sharp edges and coarse surfaces. The other monks expected to hear the clink, clink, clink of hammer and chisel for many months. But Ryokan did not use a chisel. He did not use a hammer. He had the stone moved to a secluded hut, where he sat with it day after day. For the first month, he did nothing but sit, looking at the stone from all angles, feeling its rough texture with his palms. Then he began his work. He would dip one hand in a bucket of water and gently rub a small section of the stone. He would rub for hours, his hand moving in slow, patient circles. There was no loud noise, only the near silent shh of a palm stroking a wet stone. He was not grinding it down. He was simply polishing it with the gentle friction of his own skin. His disciples grew impatient. "Master, At this rate, it will take a lifetime. Let us help you. We can break off the large chunks and speed the process. Ryokan shook his head. To strike the stone is to wound it, he said softly. Its smoothness will be born of scars, but to polish it is to know it. I am not removing what is wrong with the stone. I am revealing what is already beautiful within it. He continued for over a year. The only sound from his hut was the whisper of skin on stone. Finally, he announced he was finished. The patron and the monks came to see. The stone was magnificent. It was not just smooth, it seemed to glow with a soft internal light. It was so flawless it looked like a pool of solidified moonlight. The patron was astounded. How did you achieve such perfection without tools? Ryokan held up his right hand. The palm was covered in a thick, smooth callus, as polished as the stone itself. The world thinks peace is made by chipping away the things we do not want. But true peace is made by the gentle, patient, and loving application of one hand. The stone did not change the hand any less than the hand changed the stone. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good." Here we discover one of the most misunderstood principles of transformation. Sustainable change happens through gentle, consistent pressure rather than forceful intervention. Why are we so drawn to dramatic methods of change? Our society celebrates breakthrough moments, overnight successes, and revolutionary transformations. We want to lose weight quickly, master skills rapidly, and solve emotional problems with intensive interventions. This preference for dramatic action often leads us to use metaphorical hammers and chisels on the delicate work of personal development. Consider how this manifests in your approach to self-improvement. When you decide to become more patient, do you expect immediate results and become frustrated with your first outburst of irritation? When working on a difficult relationship, do you attempt to resolve years of tension in one difficult conversation? When trying to establish a meditation practice, do you aim for hour-long sessions and then abandon the practice when you can't maintain such intensity? Ryokan's method reveals a different approach entirely. He understood that lasting transformation requires relationship, not domination. By spending a month simply sitting with the stone, touching it, understanding its nature, he developed intimacy with his task. This preliminary period of patient observation is crucial to any meaningful change process. The gentle friction of water and hand represents what psychologists call minimum effective dose, the smallest amount of intervention that produces the desired change. In Zen practice, this might be 5 minutes of daily meditation rather than weekend retreats. In relationships, it might be one genuine conversation per week rather than marathon processing sessions. In physical health, it might be a daily walk rather than exhausting workout routines. Ryokan's wisdom that the stone did not change the hand any less than the hand changed the stone points to a profound truth about transformation. The one who seeks to change is always changed by the process. When we approach our growth with gentle consistency rather than forceful urgency, we develop qualities like patience, humility, and perseverance that become as valuable as the original goal. The Zen teacher Dogen wrote, "Practice and enlightenment are one." Ryokan embodied this teaching. He wasn't polishing a stone in order to achieve some future state of completion. The polishing itself was the practice, the meditation, the enlightenment. Each circular motion of his hand was complete in itself, while contributing to the larger transformation. This approach requires a fundamental shift in how we measure progress. In our results-oriented culture, we often dismiss small daily actions as insignificant. Yet these gentle, repeated contacts with our intention, like water slowly shaping stone, create changes that forced methods cannot achieve. The smoothness that emerges from patient polishing has a quality of integrity that quick fixes lack. Think about areas in your life where you've been using hammers and chisels. Perhaps you've been harsh with yourself about old patterns, trying to eliminate them through criticism and willpower. Maybe you've been impatient with your meditation practice, disappointed that insights don't arrive on your schedule. Consider what Ryokan's approach might look like in these areas. The Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa spoke of basic goodness, the fundamental wisdom and compassion that exists within every being. Ryokan's words, "I am not removing what is wrong with the stone, I am revealing what is already beautiful within it," echo this understanding. True transformation isn't about fixing our flaws, but about gently polishing away the layers that obscure our essential nature. Notice that the finished stone didn't just appear smooth, but seemed to glow with inner light. This luminosity isn't added from outside, but revealed through patient care. When we approach ourselves and others with Ryokan's gentle consistency, we often discover that what emerges has a quality of radiance that forced change cannot produce. Tonight, as you consider the changes you wish to make in your life, remember the whisper of skin on stone. What would it mean to approach your growth with such gentleness? To trust that daily moments of loving attention can accomplish what urgency and force cannot. To understand that the hand doing the polishing is transformed as much as the stone being polished. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful word is the silent conversation between water, hand, and stone. The gentle dialogue of consistent, loving attention that reveals the hidden light within. Our final story takes us to the wisdom found in darkness. In the main hall of a mountain monastery, a single oil lantern was kept burning all through the night. It was an ancient tradition. The duty of caring for this lantern, refilling the oil, trimming the wick, was given to the youngest acolyte, a boy named Taka. Taka was diligent, but he was also anxious. He became obsessed with the shadows the lantern cast. He noticed how the shadow of a pillar would stretch and distort, looking like a monster on the far wall. He saw how the shadow of a statue of the Buddha would flicker and dance, making it seem restless. His nights became a torment of tiny adjustments. He would move a floor cushion an inch to the left to shorten its shadow. He would trim the wick to make the flames smaller, only to find it made the shadows darker. He would try to angle the lantern, but that would only send a new, strange shadow into a different corner. He was exhausted, his mind consumed by a constant battle against these phantoms of light. One night, the old master entered the hall and found Taka on his hands and knees, frantically trying to reposition a vase of flowers whose shadow he found unsettling. "Taka," the master said gently, "your mind is very busy." "Master, the shadows," Taka said, his voice trembling with fatigue. "I cannot make them right. They are always moving, always imperfect. They disturb the peace of the hall." The master looked at the flickering flame and at the dancing shadows. He then walked calmly to the lantern, took a deep breath, and with a soft puff, blew out the flame. The hall was plunged into absolute, profound darkness and silence. Taka froze, his eyes wide. The master's voice came from the blackness. "Taka," he asked, "where are the shadows now?" Taka was silent for a long moment. There were no shapes, no distortions, no problems to fix. There was only darkness and stillness. "They are gone, Master." "So, tell me," the master said, his voice a calm anchor in the dark. "Is it the nature of the light to create shadows? Or is it the nature of your mind to become fixated on them? Perhaps the peace you are seeking is not in rearranging the world to perfect the light, but in learning to rest in the darkness, where such problems do not exist at all. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, if you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are. This tale unveils the futility of trying to perfect the imperfectible and the peace that comes from accepting what is beyond our control. Taka's obsession with shadows represents one of the most common forms of modern suffering. The compulsive need to arrange external conditions to create internal peace. We exhaust ourselves trying to control circumstances, other people's opinions, future outcomes, and the countless variables that create the shadows in our lives. Like Taka, we believe that if we could just adjust this one thing, move that conversation slightly, or arrange our environment more perfectly, then we would finally find tranquility. Why does the mind become so fixated on controlling what cannot be controlled? Zen Buddhism points to our fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of security. We seek safety through manipulation of external conditions rather than through developing equanimity with whatever conditions arise. This leads to what the Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa called spiritual materialism, using spiritual practice itself as another method of control rather than as a path to surrender. Consider how this plays out in contemporary life. We might spend hours crafting the perfect email to avoid any possibility of misunderstanding, only to create new shadows of miscommunication. We adjust our behavior constantly to manage how others perceive us, exhausting ourselves in an endless dance with shadows of judgment. We try to optimize our schedules, our homes, our relationships, believing that the right arrangement will eliminate all sources of discomfort. The Master's radical solution, extinguishing the flame entirely, points to a profound teaching about the nature of problems. Sometimes the most direct path to peace isn't solving problems but questioning whether they need to be solved at all. In darkness, the shadows that seemed so problematic simply don't exist. In deep acceptance, the imperfections that torment us lose their power to disturb. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to real issues that need addressing. Rather, it means developing the wisdom to distinguish between genuine problems that require action and phantom problems created by our resistance to natural phenomena. Shadows are not enemies of light. They are inevitable companions to it. Similarly, uncertainty is not the enemy of peace. Anxiety about uncertainty is. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The flickering shadows that frustrated Taka were expressions of impermanence, the constant dance of light and form that characterizes all existence. When we fight against this fundamental fluidity, we create suffering. When we learn to dance with it, we find freedom. The Master's teaching method reveals another layer of wisdom. Instead of giving Taka techniques for better shadow management, he removed the conditions that created shadows altogether. Sometimes the most helpful thing we can do for ourselves or others is to step completely out of the problem framework rather than seeking better solutions within it. This practice of blowing out the flame might mean temporarily stepping away from social media when we're obsessed with others' opinions. It might involve turning off news for a while when we're consumed with events beyond our influence. It could mean sitting in meditation without trying to have any particular experience, allowing our minds to rest in the darkness of not knowing. The 14th century Zen master Basui wrote, "What is this mind? It is the sound of the rain and the wind." In the darkness of the hall, Taka could finally hear what had been present all along beneath his busy problem-solving. The natural silence that exists when we stop trying to perfect the imperfectible. The story suggests that peace is not the absence of shadows, but the absence of our struggle with shadows. When we stop frantically rearranging conditions to eliminate what disturbs us, we discover a deeper tranquility that doesn't depend on having everything just right. This is the peace that exists in darkness, not the darkness of despair, but the darkness of rest, of not knowing, of surrender to what is. Tonight, as you notice your mind trying to solve unsolvable problems or perfect imperfectible conditions, remember Taka and his shadows. Can you identify the metaphorical flames you might need to extinguish? The compulsive checking, adjusting, fixing, and controlling that exhausts your spirit? What would it feel like to rest in the darkness where such problems simply don't exist? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sometimes the most radical act is to stop seeking altogether and simply rest in the vast darkness of acceptance, where the shadows of our resistance finally disappear, and what remains is the profound peace that was there all along. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between superficial understanding and lived wisdom. This is the tale of following the stream. In the heart of a vast wilderness, where towering pines stretched toward endless sky, two city dwellers found themselves completely lost. They had ventured into the high timber for what was supposed to be a simple day hike, but overconfidence and poor preparation had led them far from any familiar trail. For a day and a night, they wandered through the dense forest, their anxiety growing with each passing hour. The comfortable urban world they knew seemed impossibly distant. Every tree looked the same. Every path led to another confusing intersection, and their sense of direction had completely abandoned them. Just as panic was beginning to set in, they stumbled upon an old hermit sitting peacefully beside a small clearing. His weathered face spoke of years spent in solitude, and his calm presence offered immediate comfort to the desperate travelers. "How do we find our way back to civilization?" they asked urgently, their voices carrying the desperation of people who had exhausted their own resources. The hermit looked at them with kind eyes that seemed to see more than their immediate predicament. "I could tell you," he replied thoughtfully, "but you'd still get lost." The two men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the straightforward directions they had hoped for. "What should we do?" they asked, their frustration evident. "Go with the flow," the hermit answered simply. "I beg your pardon," one of them responded, clearly expecting something more practical and specific. The hermit smiled and gestured toward a small stream that bubbled cheerfully through the clearing. "Go with the flow. You see that stream over there? Just follow it. Streams go into creeks, and creeks go into rivers, and rivers go through towns. Also, along the way you'll have water to drink and berries to eat." This practical advice made immediate sense to the lost travelers. Following water downstream was indeed a reliable way to find human settlements, and the stream would provide essential resources they needed for survival during their journey. But one of the men, perhaps having heard spiritual teachings before, asked a deeper question. Is that what Zen people mean when they say, "Go with the flow"? The hermit paused for a moment, considering this question with the same careful attention he had given their practical need for directions. "Yes and no," he replied enigmatically, and then continued along his way, leaving the two men to find their own understanding of his words. The Buddha once said, "If you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are." This teaching points to the layered nature of wisdom that the hermit embodied in his response to the lost travelers. The deeper teaching here shows us how authentic spiritual guidance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The hermit's advice was both completely practical and profoundly metaphorical. On the surface level, following the stream was simply good wilderness survival strategy. On a deeper level, it represented the entire approach to living that Zen encourages. Why did the hermit say the travelers would still get lost, even if he gave them directions? This points to a fundamental truth about the difference between receiving information and developing wisdom. External directions can guide us temporarily, but they don't develop our inner capacity for navigation. Real wisdom involves learning to read the natural signs and flow with the underlying currents of life itself. Consider how this applies to our spiritual seeking. We often approach teachers and teachings looking for specific directions. Tell me exactly what to do to become enlightened. Give me the precise meditation technique that will solve my problems. But this approach, while understandable, misses the deeper point. True spiritual guidance doesn't provide a map, but teaches us how to read the territory. It doesn't give us someone else's answers, but helps us develop the capacity to find our own. Like the stream that naturally knows its way to the ocean, we each have an innate wisdom that can guide us if we learn to trust and follow it. The phrase "go with the flow" has become so common in popular culture that it's almost lost its meaning, often interpreted as passive resignation or lack of direction. But the hermit's yes and no response points to a more nuanced understanding. True flowing isn't about drifting aimlessly, but about aligning our efforts with the natural currents of wisdom and compassion. The stream represents the Tao, the natural way that underlies all existence. When we align ourselves with this deeper flow, our actions become effortless and effective. We stop pushing against reality and learn to work with the grain of existence rather than against it. But this requires developing a different kind of intelligence than our usual problem-solving mind. The travelers wanted explicit directions because that's how the rational mind works, through clear, step-by-step instructions. But the deeper intelligence the hermit was pointing toward operates more like intuition, sensing the right direction moment by moment rather than following a predetermined plan. This is why contemplative traditions emphasize present moment awareness. The stream doesn't need to know where the ocean is. It simply flows in the direction that feels natural right now. Similarly, when we develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, we can sense the appropriate response to each situation without needing to figure out the entire journey in advance. Tonight, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, can you sense the streams of natural wisdom flowing beneath the surface of your daily concerns? What would it mean to trust that deeper current while still attending responsibly to practical necessities? Buddha's wisdom reminds us Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The hermit's guidance was like lighting a candle in the traveler's minds, providing not just directions, but a way of approaching life that could serve them in countless future situations. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine." "Ah," the teacher said with genuine interest. "And who owned it before him?" "My grandfather," the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. "He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead." The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. "And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn?" The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly, recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired, the parent becomes empty nester, the student becomes teacher, the healthy person faces illness. These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. Because nothing lasts forever. Suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love. And even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the paradox of absolute truth. This is the lesson of the hermit and the contradictory teaching. A renowned Zen master had gained a reputation throughout the region for his profound insights and transformative teachings. Students came from far and wide to study under his guidance, each hoping to receive the wisdom that would lead them to enlightenment. Among all his teachings, there was one that he considered his greatest and most fundamental insight. Buddha is your own mind, the master would tell his students with absolute conviction. This is the highest truth I can share with you. Stop looking outside yourself for what you already possess. Stop seeking in temples and books what is already present in your own consciousness. Buddha is your own mind. Realize this, and you will be free. One young monk was so deeply moved by this teaching that it seemed to illuminate everything he had been searching for. The idea that enlightenment wasn't something to be acquired from external sources, but was actually the very nature of his own mind, struck him as the most profound truth he had ever encountered. This insight felt so complete and revolutionary that he decided it deserved his total dedication. Leaving the monastery and his fellow students behind, the monk retreated deep into the wilderness to meditate on this great teaching. He found a remote cave in the mountains where he could practice without any distractions or influences from the outside world. There, surrounded by the silence of nature, he spent 20 years in solitary contemplation, probing every aspect of the master's words. During those 2 decades of hermitage, he explored the teaching from every possible angle. He meditated on the nature of mind, examined his own consciousness, and worked to fully realize the truth that Buddha was indeed his own mind. The years passed in deep practice as he sought to embody this understanding completely. One day, a traveling monk happened to pass through the forest near his cave. The hermit, excited to meet another practitioner after so many years of solitude, emerged from his retreat to greet the visitor. Through their conversation, he learned that this traveler had also studied under the same renowned master. "How wonderful to meet a fellow student," the hermit exclaimed. "Please, tell me what you know of our master's greatest teaching. I have spent 20 years contemplating his profound insight that Buddha is your own mind." The traveling monk's eyes lit up with recognition, but his response was entirely unexpected. "Ah, yes, the master has indeed been very clear about this subject," he said enthusiastically. "His greatest teaching, the one he emphasizes above all others, is this: Buddha is not your own mind." The hermit stood speechless, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. After 20 years of dedicated practice based on what he believed was the master's highest teaching, he was now hearing the exact opposite presented with equal conviction by another student of the same teacher. As the Buddha taught, the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. Here we discover that even the most profound teachings are simply tools for awakening, not ultimate truths to be grasped and defended. Why do we cling so tightly to particular formulations of truth when reality itself transcends all concepts? Zen Buddhism reveals that our attachment to specific teachings, no matter how profound, can become obstacles to the very understanding those teachings were meant to inspire. The hermit's confusion points to a fundamental aspect of Zen instruction. Masters often use contradictory teachings to prevent students from turning insights into rigid beliefs. The purpose isn't to provide a final answer, but to exhaust the mind's tendency to grasp and conceptualize, creating space for direct realization beyond all words and ideas. Both teachings, Buddha is your mind and Buddha is not your mind, serve important functions depending on the student's needs and understanding. For someone lost in external seeking, Buddha is your mind redirects attention inward. For someone attached to the idea of possessing Buddha nature, Buddha is not your mind dissolves that subtle grasping. Consider your own relationship with spiritual or philosophical teachings. How often do you turn helpful pointers into absolute truths that must be defended against contradictory perspectives? The hermit's 20-year retreat, while dedicated and sincere, demonstrates how even correct understanding can become a form of limitation when held too rigidly. In Zen practice, we learn to hold all teachings lightly, like medicine that serves its purpose and then is no longer needed. The master's apparent contradiction wasn't inconsistency, but skillful means, using whatever approach would most effectively dissolve each student's particular form of confusion. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The hermit had become so invested in thinking about the teaching that he may have lost touch with the direct experience it was meant to indicate. The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching applies even to the Buddha's own words and the most revered Zen teachings. Truth isn't found in the perfect formulation, but in the awakening that transcends all formulations. Look deeply at your own cherished beliefs and understandings. Where might you be holding on to insights so tightly that they've become barriers to deeper realization? What would it mean to receive all teachings as provisional tools rather than final truths? Tonight, as you consider the various teachings and philosophies that have shaped your understanding, can you remember the hermit's surprise at discovering contradiction where he expected confirmation? Can you hold your most treasured insights lightly enough that they remain alive and functional rather than becoming rigid dogma? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, truth has no form, how can it be held? Whether Buddha is your mind or not your mind, whether teachings are correct or incorrect, the reality they point toward remains free of all concepts, available in this moment to anyone willing to look beyond the finger to see the moon itself. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distractions started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity, with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. Our next story reveals how liberation comes not from achieving something new, but from recognizing what was never born and can never die. This is the teaching of freedom from birth and death. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted on the spring breeze, a dedicated student named Goshu approached the wise Zen master Yue. For years, Goshu had been practicing meditation, studying texts, and following all the prescribed methods of spiritual development. Yet despite his sincere efforts, he felt no closer to the enlightenment he desperately sought. Goshu bowed respectfully before his teacher, his face showing the strain of prolonged spiritual seeking. "Master, I have been studying Zen for many years, following every instruction, sitting in meditation daily, reading the ancient texts. But I have not yet succeeded. I feel as lost as when I began. Please give me some guidance. What am I missing? What more must I do?" Yue looked at his earnest student with compassion, seeing the weight of spiritual ambition that had become a burden rather than a path to freedom. He understood that Goshu's very effort to achieve enlightenment had become the obstacle to recognizing his inherent awakeness. "There is no secret trick to Zen study," Yue said simply. "It's just a matter of freedom from birth and death." Goshu's brow furrowed with confusion. This answer seemed to make his quest even more daunting. Master, how does one pass through birth and death to freedom? That sounds like the most difficult task of all. If I cannot even quiet my mind for a few minutes, how can I transcend birth and death? Yui's eyes brightened, and he raised his voice with sudden intensity. Your every passing thought is birth and death. At these words, something shifted dramatically in Goshu's understanding. Like a veil suddenly lifted, he saw that what he had been seeking as some future attainment was actually the very nature of his present experience. The constant arising and passing away of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. This endless flow was not something to escape, but the very freedom he had been pursuing. Goshu went into ecstasy, feeling as if he had put down a heavy burden he didn't even realize he had been carrying. The relief was profound and immediate. All his years of struggling to become something special dissolved into the recognition that he had never been anything other than the aware space in which all experience appears and disappears. As the Buddha observed, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What emerges from this story is the recognition that we suffer not because we lack something, but because we don't recognize the freedom that is our fundamental nature. Why do we carry the heavy burden of spiritual becoming? Zen Buddhism points to our identification with the content of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. We mistake ourselves for the stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, instead of recognizing ourselves as the aware space in which this stream flows. Every thought that arises is born. Every thought that fades away dies. Every emotion emerges from nowhere and dissolves back into nowhere. Every sensation appears and disappears. This constant birth and death happening in awareness is not a problem to solve, but the very movement of life itself. The deeper understanding here reveals that what we call birth and death are simply names we give to the natural flowing of experience. When we identify with the flow, we suffer the anxiety of constant change. When we recognize ourselves as the awareness in which the flow appears, we discover unshakable peace. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the extraordinary fact that the enlightenment we seek is not hidden in special states, but in the ordinary awareness that knows every state. The same awareness that knows anxiety also knows peace. The same awareness that knows confusion also knows clarity. The Buddha said, "In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. Our spiritual seeking often creates the very problem it attempts to solve by imagining that some states of consciousness are spiritual while others are mundane. Consider how much energy you invest in trying to have better thoughts, more peaceful emotions, or more pleasant experiences. Each effort to improve the content of consciousness reinforces the belief that you are that content, rather than the awareness that witnesses it all with equal presence. In Japanese Zen, there is a teaching called just sitting, or shikantaza. This practice involves recognizing that the sitting itself is enlightenment, rather than a method to achieve enlightenment. Similarly, your current awareness, exactly as it is the freedom you seek, rather than a stepping stone to freedom. Tonight, as thoughts arise and pass away in your awareness, Can you recognize the birth and death that UEA pointed to? Can you see that you are not the thoughts that come and go, but the unchanging awareness in which they appear? As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The salvation is not in perfecting the conditioned, but in recognizing the unconditioned awareness that you already are. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walked slowly through a dense forest, his shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams deferred. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Exhausted from walking and thinking, he stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he murmured to himself. Instantly, as if materializing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick or illusion. The water looked pure, inviting. Tentatively, he brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his parched throat needed. "That was strange," he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but nourishing meal appeared before him on a wooden plate. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been harvested. The aroma made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house materialized. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Spacious rooms filled with light, comfortable furnishings, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I'll need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The rational voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman.
This is ridiculous. I'm not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real.
As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally, even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree, with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he muttered, and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply conditioned pattern in the human mind, the tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems, that abundance feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This reflexive doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we've been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what's possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with cynicism and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed, but his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things, and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have ulterior motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we're not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there's a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to self-defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we're dismissing good fortune, abundance, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. Can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests? Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it's fulfilled by them. And our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it's expanded. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of seeking and finding. This is the master sculptor's discovery. In a bustling stone quarry beneath towering mountains, a master sculptor moved among the marble blocks with the practiced eye of one who had spent decades coaxing beauty from stone. The morning sun cast golden light across the quarry, illuminating countless blocks that seemed to whisper their stories to him. "Aha," he would say, running his weathered hands across smooth surfaces. "There is a heroic figure locked in that piece, and a saint trapped inside that other one." His reputation had grown precisely because of this gift, his ability to sense what he called the suchness of every stone, to see beyond raw material to its true nature waiting to be released. But on this morning, the sculptor's heart carried a different weight. For over 40 years, he had been searching for something special, the perfect block from which he could create his masterwork, a glorious statue of the Buddha. His energies were waning now, and still this elusive Buddha block remained hidden from him. He had traveled to great quarries around the world, consulted experts, hired specialists to scour remote areas, yet nowhere could he find that one perfect slab that would allow him to release the most perfect likeness of Buddha. Feeling the weight of his lifelong quest, the sculptor sought consolation from a local Zen priest who headed a small temple at the end of his street. The temple was modest, with a peaceful courtyard where a stone well sat, surrounded by carefully tended moss. "Master," the sculptor said, bowing deeply, "I have searched for 40 years for the perfect stone from which to carve the Buddha. My life's work remains incomplete." The priest listened with kind eyes, then smiled gently. "No problem," he said with such simplicity that the sculptor felt both confused and hopeful. "Do you mean you can tell me where I might find the perfect material from which I can release the Buddha of my dreams?" the sculptor asked, excitement rising in his voice. "Of course." "Where?" The priest raised his hand and pointed across the courtyard. "Over there," he said, indicating the stone well. The excited sculptor hurried to the well and peered down into the still, dark water. There, looking back at him with the same questioning eyes, the same lined face marked by years of searching, was his own reflection. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? The deeper teaching here shows us that what we seek most desperately often lies not in some distant place or perfect circumstance, but in the very ground of our own being. Why do we exhaust ourselves searching everywhere except within? Zen Buddhism reveals that we become so focused on the object of our search that we forget to examine the searcher. The sculptor had examined thousands of stones, traveled countless miles, yet never considered that the very consciousness doing the seeking was itself the perfect material for awakening. Consider how often throughout your day you postpone contentment, waiting for better circumstances. "I'll be happy when I get the promotion, find the right partner, when conditions are finally perfect." This is seeking the Buddha block everywhere, except in the reflection looking back at us right now. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The sculptor's profound realization wasn't that he needed to become something different, but that he needed to recognize what he already was. The perfect material for expressing Buddha nature isn't found in external circumstances, but in the awareness that recognizes, seeks, and creates. The well represents the still point within consciousness, where seeking ends and finding begins. When we stop looking outward and peer into the depths of our own awareness, we discover that the one who seeks and the sought are the same. In Zen practice, we speak of original face, the essential nature that exists before conditioning. This original face isn't hidden in some special place. It's looking back at us from every mirror, every moment of genuine presence. Tonight, as you encounter the reflection of your own seeking mind, can you recognize the Buddha nature that has been with you all along? Perhaps it appears in your capacity for wonder, your longing for truth, or simply in the awareness that notices these very words. As the Buddha taught, look within, you are the Buddha. The masterwork you've been seeking isn't waiting for perfect materials. It's waiting for the recognition that the artist, the art, and the awareness that appreciates beauty are all expressions of the same essential nature. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the paradox of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley, surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a renowned Zen master whose students achieved profound realization through diligent practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to transform his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with enthusiasm, he immediately sought an audience with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room overlooking a garden, where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute diligence and unwavering effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely, with the right approach, the process could be accelerated. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really, really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied without hesitation. By now, the student was completely bewildered and increasingly agitated. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, scholarship, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. "Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that? The master's expression became gentle and compassionate, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path, the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the paradox of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal fixation actually slow our spiritual development? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on attainment creates obstacles to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually cultivate awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument, not through anxious projection toward future competence. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping that turns spiritual practice into a transaction. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to accumulate wisdom, or cultivate compassion to become better people, we're approaching the path as consumers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a fundamental split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This profound teaching points to the very heart of the master's lesson. Zen is not something we attain, but something we recognize. It's not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom illuminates why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're frantically pursuing enlightenment, we're operating from the assumption that our present experience is somehow inadequate or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most profound insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the master was pointing toward. That wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's error wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he proposed working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to flee. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called just sitting. Meditation without gaining mind, without agenda, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Consider how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing inspiration typically produces stilted results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. Let us now turn to a story about the most profound spiritual truth hiding in the most obvious place. This is the dialogue between Joshu and Nansen about the ordinary mind. In a quiet mountain monastery where morning mist drifted between ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across distant valleys, two masters engaged in a conversation that would illuminate the very heart of Zen understanding. Joshu, despite his own considerable wisdom and years of practice, approached his teacher Nansen with the earnestness of a sincere student seeking to understand the deepest mysteries of existence. The two men sat facing each other in the temple's meditation hall, where countless seekers before them had wrestled with the same fundamental questions about the nature of awakening. Joshu's inquiry came from a place of genuine perplexity. After years of intensive practice, meditation and study, he still felt uncertain about the very foundation of the spiritual path. "Master," Joshu began with characteristic directness, "what exactly is the way? With all our practices and teachings, what are we ultimately seeking?" Nansen's response was immediate and surprisingly simple. "Ordinary mind is the way," he replied, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. This answer clearly puzzled Joshu, who had expected something more esoteric, more complex, more removed from everyday experience. "If ordinary mind is the way," he pressed further, "then should we direct ourselves toward cultivating it? Should we make it our spiritual goal?" Nansen shook his head gently. "If you direct yourself toward it, you immediately go away from it," he explained. "The very effort to attain ordinary mind makes it extraordinary, and therefore no longer ordinary." Now Joshu found himself in what seemed like an impossible logical bind. "But Master, if we don't try to cultivate or attain anything, how can we ever know that this ordinary mind is actually the way? How can we recognize it without some form of practice or effort?" Nansen's final response cut through all philosophical complexity with razor-sharp clarity. The way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing turns the way into a concept, an object of understanding, which is illusion. Not knowing turns it into blankness, which misses its vibrant presence. If you truly realize the way without doubt, it becomes like the great void, so vast and boundless that it contains everything. How then could there be any distinction between right and wrong, sacred and mundane, ordinary and extraordinary? At these words, something shifted fundamentally in Joshu's understanding. The seeking mind that had been grasping for answers suddenly relaxed, and he experienced a moment of complete clarity. Not the clarity of understanding something new, but the clarity of recognizing what had been present all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, there is nothing to seek and nothing to find. Everything is already here. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that what we seek through spiritual practice
is not some special state of consciousness, but rather the ordinary awareness that is reading these words right now.
Why do we struggle to accept that ordinary mind is the way? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning that spiritual truth must be extraordinary, mystical, or dramatically different from our everyday experience. We imagine enlightenment as a permanent state of bliss, cosmic consciousness, or supernatural abilities, when in reality, it is simply the natural state of awareness without the overlay of seeking and striving. Our spiritual seeking often becomes its own obstacle. Like a person frantically searching for glasses while wearing them, we exhaust ourselves looking for something we already possess. The very effort to attain a special spiritual state creates the sense of separation between seeker and sought, between the ordinary self and some idealized, awakened self. Consider how your own mind works in this very moment. Thoughts arise and pass away. Sensations appear in your body. Sounds reach your ears. Emotions flow through your awareness. This natural functioning of consciousness, without any special effort or concentration, is what Nansen calls ordinary mind. It is already enlightened, not because it achieves some particular state, but because it is the very space in which all states appear and dissolve. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way, just like now, without seeking anything, without grasping after the fruits of Zen, just this mind that thinks and feels and perceives. This is Buddha." This ordinariness is precisely what makes it so difficult to recognize. We keep looking past it for something more impressive. The great void that Nansen mentions is not empty space, but rather the spacious awareness in which all experiences arise. Like the sky that remains unchanged whether filled with clouds or clear, this awareness remains constant through all the changing contents of experience. Joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, peace and agitation, all appear and disappear within this unchanging background of ordinary awareness. This understanding revolutionizes our approach to spiritual practice. Instead of trying to achieve some special state, we learn to recognize the awareness that is already present. Instead of seeking to transcend ordinary experience, we discover the extraordinary nature of ordinariness itself. The sound of rain becomes as sacred as temple bells. Washing dishes becomes as profound as formal meditation. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. This appreciation for the ordinary and imperfect reflects the same understanding that Nansen points toward. The way is not found in perfected states, but in the natural flow of life exactly as it is. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being aware of these words, aware of your breathing, aware of the sounds around you, can you recognize this ordinary awareness as what you have been seeking all along? Can you relax the effort to become something other than what you already are? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The way is not a destination to reach, but the very ground you are already standing on. In accepting your ordinary mind as Buddha mind, you discover that the spiritual journey was never about going somewhere else, but about recognizing where you have always been. Now, let us explore a story about recognition and the wisdom hidden in plain sight. This is the lesson of the visitor and the holy man. Word had spread throughout the countryside about a remarkable holy man who possessed extraordinary wisdom and spiritual power. People said he could answer any question, solve any problem, and provide guidance that would transform the most troubled life. He lived, according to these stories, in a simple house high atop a mountain, far from the distractions and corruptions of ordinary village life. A man from the valley below had been struggling with a persistent problem that seemed to have no solution. He had tried everything he could think of, consulting friends, seeking advice from local elders, even visiting other teachers, but nothing had brought him the clarity or peace he desperately sought. When he heard about the holy man on the mountain, he knew he had to make the journey, no matter how difficult it might be. The path up the mountain was steep and treacherous. The man climbed for hours under the burning sun, his feet growing sore, his breathing labored, his water supply dwindling, but his determination never wavered. He was certain that once he reached the top and met this legendary figure, all his troubles would be resolved through the holy man's superior wisdom and spiritual insight. Finally, after a grueling climb that left him exhausted and dusty, he reached the simple house at the mountain's peak. The structure was modest and weathered, exactly what he had expected for someone who had transcended worldly concerns. He approached the door with a mixture of anticipation and reverence, preparing himself to meet someone who possessed wisdom far beyond that of ordinary people. When he knocked, an elderly servant answered. The man was plain and unremarkable, his clothes simple, his manner humble, his appearance entirely ordinary. He looked like any of a dozen servants the visitor might encounter in his own village. "I would like to see the wise holy man," the visitor said, barely glancing at the servant as he spoke. His eyes were already searching past the old man into the house, eager to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary being he had climbed so far to meet. The servant smiled warmly and gestured for him to enter. "Please, come inside," he said gently, leading the way through the modest dwelling. As they walked through the house, the visitor looked around eagerly, his heart racing with anticipation. He examined every room they passed, searching for signs of the holy man's presence, perhaps special robes, sacred objects, or an aura of otherworldly peace. The servant continued to guide him quietly through the simple rooms, past basic furnishings and ordinary household items. Before the visitor quite realized what was happening, they had walked through the entire house and arrived at the back door. The servant opened it and gestured toward the path that led back down the mountain. The visitor stopped abruptly, confusion and disappointment washing over him. "Wait," he said, turning to face the servant with growing frustration. "I didn't come all this way to be escorted through an empty house. I want to see the holy man. Where is he?" The old servant's smile deepened, and his eyes twinkled with gentle amusement. "You already have seen him," he said quietly. "But, more importantly, I have a teaching for you that will solve whatever problem brought you here today." The visitor stared at him, not understanding. This ordinary old man couldn't possibly be the legendary holy figure he had heard about. Where was the radiant presence, the obvious signs of spiritual attainment, the dramatic wisdom that everyone talked about? "Here is the teaching," the servant continued, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "Everyone you meet in life, even if they appear plain and insignificant to you, see each of them as a wise, holy man or woman. If you can do this, if you can truly see the sacred in every person you encounter, then whatever problem you brought here today will be solved." Buddha's wisdom tells us, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. This tale unveils the profound truth that we find what we're prepared to see. and our capacity for recognition determines what wisdom becomes available to us. Why do we search for the sacred in special places and extraordinary people while overlooking the wisdom that surrounds us every day? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning that associates spiritual truth with dramatic appearances, exotic circumstances, and obviously impressive figures. But the deepest teachings often come disguised as the most ordinary encounters. The visitor's problem wasn't really the external difficulty that brought him to the mountain. His deeper problem was his inability to recognize wisdom when it didn't match his preconceptions. He was so focused on finding someone who looked like his idea of a holy man that he almost missed the actual holy man standing right in front of him. Consider your own daily interactions. How often do you dismiss people because they don't seem impressive, educated, or obviously wise? The checkout clerk who greets you with genuine warmth, the janitor who works with quiet dignity, the child who asks innocent but profound questions. Any of these encounters might offer exactly the insight you need if you're prepared to receive it. This teaching transforms how we move through the world. Instead of searching for wisdom in special places or waiting for obviously enlightened teachers to appear, we begin to approach every person as a potential source of insight. The homeless person on the street, the difficult co-worker, even the family member who annoys us. Each becomes a teacher when we're ready to learn. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we truly see others as sacred, we naturally forget our own ego's need to feel superior or special. The visitor's disappointment came from his attachment to being someone who had access to exclusive wisdom rather than someone who could recognize wisdom everywhere. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." Every person carries this same capacity to kindle understanding in others, but only when we approach them with the recognition that they might have something valuable to offer. Look deeply at your current relationships and daily encounters. Where might you be overlooking wisdom because it comes in an ordinary package? What would change in your interactions if you truly treated every person as someone who might be a disguised holy man or woman? Tonight, as you consider the various people in your life, family members, colleagues, strangers you encounter, can you practice the holy man's teaching? Can you look past surface appearances and social roles to see the deeper wisdom that every conscious being carries? Can you approach tomorrow's interactions with the recognition that your next teacher might be standing right in front of you, waiting to be seen? As the Buddha observed, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The distinction between holy and ordinary, wise and simple, teacher and student exists primarily in our own minds. When we learn to see past these artificial categories, we discover that wisdom is everywhere, waiting patiently for our recognition. Now, let us experience a Zen story about the unexpected nature of enlightenment. This is the kitchen monk's realization. In the serene mountains surrounding Lake Hakone stood a great monastery known throughout Japan for its rigorous practice and deep wisdom. Among the monks lived a humble man named Ichi, whose life would teach us about the profound difference between seeking and finding. For 55 years, Ichi had labored faithfully in the monastery kitchen, while other monks sat in formal meditation or engaged in scholarly debates. Ichi chopped vegetables, tended fires, and prepared meals with quiet dedication. His hands had grown permanently stained, his back bent from years of service, yet he approached each task with careful attention. But Ichi carried a heavy burden. Since his earliest days, he had been assigned a koan, one of those paradoxical questions that Zen masters use to crack open the thinking mind. His was the famous puzzle: what is the sound of one hand clapping? Day after day, year after year, he wrestled with this question, trying to solve it through logic, intuition, every approach his mind could devise. As decades passed, Ichi began to see himself as a failure. While other monks seemed to progress, receiving new koans or achieving insights their teachers acknowledged, Ichi remained stuck with his unsolved puzzle. He watched younger monks arrive and eventually surpass him in status and recognition. 55 years, he would whisper while stirring soup. 55 years, and still I cannot hear what one hand sounds like when it claps. The question haunted him through every chore, every quiet moment, every season of his long service. Now, as his body grew frail, Ichi knew his time was approaching its end. He had been moved to a small attic room where he could rest away from daily bustle. As he lay there, in the gathering twilight of his life, something unexpected began to happen. Gradually, the familiar weight of striving began to lift from his chest. The desperate need to solve his koan, the shame of perceived failure, the constant reaching for enlightenment, all of it slowly dissolved like mist at sunrise. Gone was the fierce desire for awakening that had driven him for decades. In place of all that seeking, Ichi discovered something he had never expected, a profound peace that seemed to cradle his entire being. The soft darkness felt not like defeat, but like the gentlest embrace. His breathing slowed, and with it, the churning of thoughts that had occupied his mind for so many years. It was in this exquisite silence, when there remained no more questions nor need for answers, when even the need for breathing seemed to fade into quiet acceptance, that Ichi finally heard it. The whooshing silence of one hand clapping filled his awareness, not as a sound, but as the very nature of existence itself, the sound that had been present all along beneath all the noise of seeking. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Cease to cherish opinions, and you will achieve enlightenment." Here we discover that enlightenment isn't something we attain through effort, but something we uncover when the effort finally ceases. Why do we struggle so intensely with the very seeking that prevents us from finding what we seek? The mind creates a fundamental split between the seeker and the sought, keeping us perpetually reaching for something we imagine exists elsewhere, in some future moment when we'll finally get it. Ichi's story illuminates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh awareness that exists before we complicate it with goals and achievements. For 55 years, he had sophisticated simple presence into complex spiritual ambition. The more expertly he sought enlightenment, the further he moved from the naturally enlightened awareness that had been with him all along. Consider how often we create this pattern. We complicate natural joy with the pursuit of happiness. We obscure natural love with the search for perfect relationships. We cover natural wisdom with endless accumulation of knowledge. Ichi's realization came not through solving his koan, but through finally letting go of the need to solve it. The sound of one hand clapping isn't a riddle to be figured out, but an invitation to rest in the space before thinking begins. The awareness that exists prior to questions and answers. Tonight, as thoughts about your own spiritual journey arise, remember Ichi's profound discovery. What if the very awareness that notices you're seeking is the enlightenment you've been seeking? The sound of one hand clapping might be closer than you think, in the very listening that hears all sounds, including silence. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sometimes the greatest achievement is the willingness to stop achieving and simply rest in what has always been present. Let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now, the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air, his friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. "You know I cannot see. The light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine." "Ah," his friend replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets." This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. "Of course," he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. "How thoughtful of you." The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground around the blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern? I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. "My friend," he said gently, "why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions. He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding, without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself, when you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. The moment we realize we've been walking in darkness while believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice, all are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out. They burn down. They flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, it illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. Let us now explore a story about acceptance, natural cycles, and what true prosperity means. This is the teaching of the rich man and the master's blessing. A wealthy merchant had built a vast fortune through years of shrewd business dealings and careful investments. His family owned multiple properties, controlled trade routes, and wielded considerable influence throughout the region. As he aged, the merchant became increasingly concerned about ensuring his family's continued prosperity long after his death. Having heard of a renowned Zen master whose wisdom was said to transcend ordinary understanding, the merchant decided to commission something special. He approached the master with a request that seemed both generous and practical. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully while displaying his finest robes and jewelry, "I would like to commission you to write something profound that will encourage the prosperity of my family for generations to come, something that my descendants can treasure and draw inspiration from long after I am gone. Money is no object. I simply want the most powerful blessing you can provide." The master listened quietly to this request, observing the merchant's obvious wealth and the sincere concern he felt for his family's future. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded his agreement and asked for a large piece of the finest paper. The merchant watched eagerly as the master prepared his brush and ink with ceremonial care. He expected elaborate calligraphy, perhaps ancient wisdom about accumulating wealth, or powerful mantras that would ensure his family's continued success in business and life. The master's reputation suggested that whatever he wrote would be both beautiful and profound. With simple, elegant strokes, the master wrote just 7 words. "Father dies, son dies, grandson dies." When the merchant read what had been written, his face flushed red with anger and disbelief. This was not at all what he had expected or requested. "Master!" he exclaimed, his voice rising with indignation. "I asked you to write something that would bring happiness and prosperity to my family for generations. Instead, you give me this depressing message about death. Why do you give me something so depressing like this?" The master looked at him with calm, compassionate eyes and began to explain the deeper meaning behind what might appear to be a morbid prediction. "Consider carefully what I have written," the master said gently. "If your son should die before you, this would bring unbearable grief to your family. Parents are not meant to outlive their children. Such loss creates a wound that never fully heals. If your grandson should die before your son, this too would bring tremendous sorrow to your family and disrupt the natural flow of life." The merchant began to listen more carefully, sensing there was something deeper in the master's words than he had initially understood. "But if your family continues, generation after generation, with each death occurring in the natural order I have described, this represents the ideal course of life. This is the pattern that brings the least suffering and the greatest harmony. This natural succession, where each generation has time to live fully before passing responsibility to the next, is true happiness and genuine prosperity." As the Buddha taught, of all things, impermanence is the most sacred. This ancient wisdom illuminates why accepting the natural order of life and death creates more genuine peace than any accumulation of material wealth ever could. Why do we resist the fundamental reality that all things, including our own lives and those of our loved ones, are temporary? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from fighting against impermanence rather than finding peace within its natural rhythms. The merchant's initial understanding of prosperity was limited to material accumulation, wealth, property, and influence that could be passed down through generations. But the master pointed to a deeper form of prosperity, the blessing of a family that experiences life and death in harmony with natural order rather than in tragic disruption of it. Consider how different our relationship to mortality becomes when we see death not as failure or tragedy, but as the natural conclusion of a life fully lived. The master's blessing wasn't morbid. It was recognition that the greatest gift we can wish for our families is that each generation has the opportunity to live completely before making way for the next. This teaching also reveals the limitation of trying to control the future through accumulation of resources. The merchant wanted to ensure his family's prosperity through external means, but the master suggested that true prosperity comes from accepting life's fundamental conditions rather than attempting to transcend them. In our modern context, we often measure family success by material legacy, the wealth we leave behind, the properties we pass down, the financial security we provide. But how often do we consider the emotional and spiritual legacy of a family that understands and accepts life's natural rhythms? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching reminds us that even while we work diligently to create good conditions for ourselves and our loved ones, the ultimate prosperity comes from understanding and accepting the temporary nature of all achievements. Look deeply at your own hopes and fears for your family's future. How much energy goes toward trying to control outcomes that are ultimately beyond our control? What would it mean to wish for your loved ones not immunity from life's natural processes, but wisdom and acceptance in meeting them? The master's blessing contains a profound recognition. The alternative to natural order is not preservation, but tragedy. By wishing for the normal sequence of generational transition, he was wishing for the absence of the premature deaths and disrupted cycles that create the deepest forms of suffering. Tonight, as you consider what you most hope for your family and loved ones, can you remember the master's wisdom? can you see that the greatest blessing might not be the avoidance of mortality, but the grace to experience it in harmony with natural order? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The Master's 7 words brought the merchant face to face with the ultimate reality that no amount of wealth can change: our participation in the endless cycle of birth, life, and death that characterizes all existence. True prosperity lies not in escaping this cycle, but in dancing gracefully within it. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising 2 fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable Sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here. The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man! I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these two very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up two fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with two eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment." The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. "But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up three fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the two of us, there were only three eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners." The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how two people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our two monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day, I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence? The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation? The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered. And that realization began your quest for self-realization? Exactly, the master nodded. That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within. After contemplative silence, the student asked, "And did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before." He gestured toward the darkening garden, where fireflies had begun their dance. I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth. "So you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself." The master's face radiated quiet joy, and never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here, we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation, because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe, for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You, yourself, deserve your love and affection. This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear, like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Tonight, as we bring this journey of ancient wisdom to a gentle close, can you feel how the inner peace they've unlocked isn't something you've gained from outside, but something you've rediscovered within yourself? These timeless stories, drawn from the depths of Buddhist tradition and shared in the spirit of Zen, have quietly opened doorways in your awareness that were always there, waiting to be found. The Buddha taught us, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. As you reflect on these words, remember that the peace you've unlocked tonight multiplies rather than diminishes when you carry it with you. Each tale we've explored together has lit another small flame of understanding in the darkness. Through these stories, you've journeyed deep into the heart of Zen wisdom, discovering that true tranquility emerges not from perfect circumstances, but from perfect acceptance of whatever arises. As you prepare to fall asleep to these teachings, feel how naturally they've settled into your consciousness, like old friends finding their way home. The inner peace you've unlocked during these hours isn't fragile or temporary. It's the same unshakable tranquility that Buddhist monks have cultivated for millennia, and it becomes stronger each time you remember to access it. Even as sleep approaches, even as your conscious mind begins to rest, these Zen teachings continue their gentle work, weaving themselves into your dreams and your deeper knowing. These forgotten tales have revealed what Zen Buddhism has always taught, that awakening happens not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet recognition of what was never actually lost. As you fall asleep tonight, wrapped in the wisdom of these ancient stories, notice how easily peace flows when you stop trying to manufacture it and simply allow it to unfold. Your journey through these Buddhist teachings has been more than entertainment for a restless mind. It's been a homecoming to your own inner stillness. The peace you've unlocked will remain with you long after these stories fade, a steady presence that deepens each time you remember to pause and breathe consciously. As you drift towards sleep, let these timeless teachings continue their work in the deeper chambers of your heart. May the inner peace you've unlocked tonight be your constant companion, and may the gentle wisdom of Zen Buddhism guide you into the most restful sleep. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well,